This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 439, Drupal 7 Long-Term Support. On today's show, we're talking about Drupal 7 long-term support, common security tips, and support services you can use with guests Greg Knaddison, Aaron Frost, and Dave Welch. We'll also cover Storybook as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests today are Greg Knaddison. He has been involved in the Drupal community in many ways, but most consistently as a member of the Drupal security team since 2008. Wow. He has especially spent time trying to make our processes and policies supportive of the wonderful volunteers on the team and helping contributed project authors get fixes released. Our next guest is Aaron Frost. Frosty is the CEO and founder of Hero Devs, one of the founders of ngConf, the father of 5 beautiful children, and the identical twin brother to one of the coolest people in the world. When he's not fighting fish at the lake, he is usually enthralled creating a wonderful meal in the kitchen. And last but certainly not least, Dave Welch, a software engineer of nearly 2 decades. Dave Welch is the CTO of Hero Devs, where he heads up the never-ending support initiative and end-of-life technologies. His roles have ranged from startup life as an employee number 1, solutions architect at a large enterprise, consulting across a number of highly governed and regulated industries. Dave has 2 young kids, is a husband of a New York Times best-selling author. Greg, Aaron, David, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
There are a lot of kids in those intros, and
many kids.
Best-selling author. That's super interesting too. There's a lot to dig in on the intros here, but
yeah.
I think we'll get into our main topic. I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for his 3rd tour of duty here at Talking Drupal. Ivan Stegic, CEO of 10-7.
Hey, hello. How's it going, guys?
It is going. And last but certainly, again, not least, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Good evening. Happy to be here. Looking forward to hearing about Drupal 7 long-term support.
I'm glad you got upgraded to founder and not co-founder like last time.
I threatened him before you came on. I said, like, listen, keep messing with me, and I'm going to call you co-founder again. All right. And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to our AI generated. Wait a second. Not Martin Anderson Klutz. It's actually Mark Andrew Casillas, a Drupal technical lead at Canopy Studios and a maintainer of some Drupal modules of his own, a member of the community working group. Marky, what do you have for us this week?
Hi, yeah. This week we have the Storybook module. It's a brand new module that just came out. It helps make it easier to create a connection between Drupal and Storybook. It adds some Twig functionality so you can actually write your stories in Twig instead of having to write it in React, which of course no one likes. Well, some people like, I don't know. But also you don't have to write it in YAML or JSON. It makes it very easy to connect to Drupal and actually pull in your theme and make Storybook a lot easier. I've been playing with it for about a month now and really been enjoying it. It's less than a year old. Right now, it's only it's in its alpha 4. It's got about 6 issues that are still open. He's closed a couple in the last week or so. It's actively maintained. One thing about it, it doesn't have a lot of usage stats because this is for development only. You really don't want to use this on your live site. You want to have it on your development site. I use it just on the DDev locally, and then that way I can check everything and then push out everything live. Matteo Bosch from Lullabot. I actually don't know. I've always called his screen name Epsio, but that's because I'm dyslexic and I know that's wrong. It's Eopso. Is that right? Anybody know? Anybody got a
that sounds right. We all know how I am with names. That sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay, good. But he does a really good job. Of course, he helped write single directory components, all the CL server stuff and everything like that. It's really a great replacement for the CL server. Just made it a ton easier to get Drupal into Storybook. It's twig-based stories, like I said. So you basically, there are two new twig functions, one called stories, where you lay out the different categories of your stories. And then inside each of the stories, you put a story tag, and then you can either connect to, you can write your raw twig function, bump in your embeds, or embed a single directory component. You don't need single directory components to use this, but it certainly is a nice way to like section off each of your twig files and your components in there. There's a great instruction on how to set this up on the module page, connecting to Drupal, making sure that your development.services.yaml file is correct, so it doesn't do the cores issue. There is a cores issue. There is one permission that you have to set so that people can see the story, or anonymous people can see the stories. Other than that, it is locked down, so you don't have to worry about that. It's way easier than CL Server, like I said, because CL Server wanted JSON stories, which you couldn't even like send like attributes and stuff like that into your story. And with this, it actually pulls in your theme, all your theme colors, all your theme libraries gets pulled in, and then with your single development or your single directory components, your component looks very, very clean. It's not as opinionated as other Storybook integrations. There are a couple out there, but those are all very, very opinionated as to what Storybook should be, and that should be your mess, not somebody else's mess. So yeah, Storybook, the module of the week.
Yeah, I'm really excited to check this out. I mean, I've been using Storybook extensively for the last, I don't know, 3 years, maybe, give or take. And I've always just kind of manually integrated it with Drupal. So I get a couple projects starting up this year. I'd love to kind of see how to get it set up. Also, I've been doing some experimentation with single directory components and pretty excited about that. So I'd love to see kind of how those two things work together and, start moving into the future.
Yeah, I started using it because I'm moving the Alley Talks website from Gatsby to Drupal, and that's already a bunch of React components. So it was very easy just to grab those components, copy the HTML or the JSX, rename class name to class, because if you don't do that, everything messes up, and then just throw all your component stuff into their folders as needed. Made my life a ton easier. So it was really, really good.
Super interesting.
And it was a lot easier to set up than other integrations. I don't want to mention names because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm being mean to them, but I'm using this now. Let me just say that it's just a lot easier. The one downside is because it makes you use your development services. You really don't want that on your production site. So it makes it hard to share the Storybook. Like one thing about some of the other integrations is you can publish your stories out into a Git pages or something like that. And that way everybody can take a look at that. With this, it's a little bit harder to do. So that's the only downside.
Could you store and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but could you store your Storybook in like a separate repo and like other people could check it out if need be?
No, because the problem is it actually needs to talk to Drupal to get the CSS and the stories and the components and everything. So that is it doesn't have a built Storybook. It's a constant development Storybook.
Yeah, it sounds like you. So what I do with some of my sites where it's manually integrated, I use like Webpack or something to build Storybook. Is I build it on dev environments so it's accessible, and then I just purge those directories before shipping to production. And you could do the same thing here, where you just purge the development services file as part of the build process. But it is something that you have to be aware of. You don't want to just push that up.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it would be fun. But Storybooks sounds like it would be fun.
It's a great integration, so I recommend it highly.
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us this week. And if folks wanted to connect with you or suggest a module of the week, how could they go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I'm a Marky on Drupal.org or at Drupal.org and Drupal Slack, so you can reach out there. You could actually reach out to Martin, who normally does this, and that's probably more likely to get it on air, unless except me. I mean, or you can do it by carrier pigeon. They fly through New Mexico all the time, so you'd be fine.
Funny story. My neighbor actually has homing pigeons, so I don't know if they're a cousin of carrier pigeons, but
I think they're the same thing. Carrier pigeons, homing pigeons. The whole point of a homing pigeon is to go to where you need to send the message. I think that's the thing.
My car doesn't appreciate it, but that's a topic for a different podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Let's move on to our primary topic.
All right. So let's start with you, Greg. Can you remind our listeners when the official Drupal 7, the third official Drupal 7 end of life is, and final end of life?
Yeah, really exactly. So there was a time period where the end of life was extended once, and then people were like, are you going to do that again? And then we sort of created a framework for when it would be extended again. And then we said, enough of that. Lots of behind the scenes coordination with a bunch of different stakeholders to get to this decision. And I was only involved in part of that. But January 5th, 2025 is the final community supported point for Drupal 7.
I am very excited about that, but also a little trepidatious. I mean, there's some
precedent.
Yeah, there's so much on Drupal 7 still, but it's also nice to, I mean, we're in Drupal 10 now. It'll be nice to, in general, move on as a community to newer versions. But yeah, official end of life, January 5th, 2025. So we've got about 10 months.
Okay.
I just want to point out that I think Greg very carefully chose his words and said community supported Drupal 7. And I don't know if we should dig in there a little bit by what that means.
We totally can.
Yeah, I think that's the meat of it. That's the real question. Is what happens after that community support is over, and I think that's part of why there's a definite date now. It gives more certainty to site owners. They know, hey, this is the point where I should migrate off, because maybe for some folks, because they're saying, well, I'm interested in getting that community support, but at the same time, it gives a firm date for the maintainers. And that's the transition point, I think. So a lot of the maintainers are, as you were saying, are on Drupal 10, Drupal 11. They're working on, the more modern versions, and that's where their interest is. So for the Drupal security team, the volunteer folks, right? I've mentioned this idea of volunteers on the Drupal security team. They're not as interested in working on that old Drupal 7 thing. And that is, I think, where commercial vendors can come in and fill a role for folks who can't migrate off, don't want to migrate off, and want to stay on Drupal 7 and get some kind of support after the community support ends.
I think we have to call it legacy, Greg. We can't call it old. That just seems mean.
Fair enough.
I'm half kidding. I mean, come on, guys. So I have a question, and I think Yvonne alluded to this kind of slightly. So I mean, are we thinking like January 5th is it for Drupal 7, or is there going to be like another push to like, oh, we're going to push it to like the middle of 2025? Like, what do we think?
I haven't heard any hints of wiggle room about the level of community support after January 5th. I think that's pretty done.
Well, that's good, because I'm a firm believer in like we should let it go.
Yeah,
like Frozen. So that's good. Now, Greg, I'm gonna go ask you this again, because I think you're going to be able to reassure people, right? Once Drupal 7 goes end of life, like officially, right, it'll still work. Like their site's not going to just stop working, right?
Right. Absolutely. There's there's nothing like hidden in the code that makes it stop working on January 6th or something like that. There are things like browser compatibility and other things that, like, the web moves on, right? Drupal's part of a bigger world of things, so there are elements like that might like stop working, and so but I think an extremely important area obviously is the security support. And so while Drupal won't stop working, a lot of organizations, folks have mentioned like regulatory backgrounds, right? And so if you've got a site that's in a regulatory environment, having a named security support can be extremely important to have it continue working and continue to be like, what does it mean to be quote unquote working? Well, having security support is part of the package of what makes a site work in certain environments.
I mean, I think the worst thing that might happen, right, is like a message on your, like in your status report, right, that would say like, hey, this isn't supported, like upgrade, please.
That's right. Yeah. For folks who have, update status module turned on, which of course I encourage people to do, that they're going to see a new message giving them information about end of life and what their options are beyond the community support timeframe.
Depending on their mindset, they may choose to ignore those messages and get very upset at them. But hey, listen, Greg just gave you a pro tip on how to turn those messages off.
and especially if you're replacing the update status with another module that can give you different advice about your support, right? So we've seen how that can be swapped out for other providers of update status information or hooked into, so that you've got like more accurate for your environment, for your specific situation.
Wait a second. You're blowing my mind here. Are you telling me that there is an update status module, maybe specifically for Drupal 7 updates?
Yeah. So that's, what there is a possibility, I'll say. I don't think that there's anything that's like publicly ready to be downloaded today, but there is a possibility for other modules to hook into that to give site specific advice. And I believe that that's on the roadmap for the Hero Dev stuff. A little preview maybe of what's to be talked about later.
Interesting. We are definitely going to get into that. I look forward to that.
Greg,
question.
You've been on the security team for a long time, more than a decade, I think.
16 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
Not quite that. It'll turn 16 this year.
That's a long time, and it's a long time to be responsible for security for such a major community asset. What does end of life mean from a security perspective for Drupal 7 and for you?
From the perspective of the security team, it means like less work probably. So right now, there are periodically issues that affect both Drupal 10 and Drupal 7, right? And so, as I mentioned, there's generally more maintainers who are interested in working on the Drupal 10 version of that patch, and that's where it gets finalized first. This is, also the pattern that we see in the public issue queue, is that things get fixed, generally speaking, in the most recent version of Drupal and then backported as appropriate. And what we really don't want to have is a situation where there's an important bug that we want to release, Drupal 11's ready to go, and we're waiting on a Drupal 7 port of that, or Drupal 10's ready to go, and we're waiting on a Drupal 7 port of that. And so that's kind of the tension that there is in the security team. So that's why I say it means less work, because backporting from 10 to 9 when 9 was supported, or from 11 to 10, that's easier to do than it is to backport all the way to Drupal 7.
Okay. Now, Dave, this question might sound a little out of sorts going directly to you, because we haven't talked exactly about what Hero Devs is going to offer at the moment. But when you're hearing about a technology that's starting to go end of life like Drupal 7, what kinds of things are you evaluating, especially around security, when you're looking at a tool and it's going end of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say the immediate thing that happens is we start with fear and then work our way to excitement, right? All these bad things are about to happen. How many people are affected? How do we get out of the hole of it? No. There's a lot of different signals, I'd say, that we end up measuring. And it kind of happens in a specific sequence from the Hero Dev side, right? Frost and the kind of the product side of the team, right, from the business side, they do a lot of analysis to figure out, what the market's doing, what the community is doing, what the risks are, what the migration hurdles are, taking into account what kind of event is this, right? Some end of life deals are really not that big of a deal. You can push a button to migrate and you're good to go. Everybody loves that, right? We all go back to work. Some of them are not, right? And especially I think you see the rift Drupal 7 has, like with the latest versions, right, with like TED and everything else that comes along. There's still, I think it's like 45 to 47% of the Drupal sites out there reporting metrics are still Drupal 7. So
yeah,
so that went right off the bat when we started to get signals on that and people asking about it, we knew it was a big deal to dig in. Drupal's a really interesting one for us too, just because of the way that Drupal's obviously built and engineered, the way that the community has developed over the last 2+ decades, roughly, right? And also the module structure, right? I mean, there is a lot of little pieces that build up to make Drupal. And so I'd say it's, on one hand, it's a very well-known course, right? Providing support for end of life and even runtimes like Drupal is something that is not new to the software engineering world, but it takes a very unique approach to do it for all these companies. But on the other hand, like there are unique parts to this that are specific to Drupal that are very much in flux. And we're working with people like Greg and Fabian and some of these other community members to ensure that we're solving things the actual right way, that we can meet, both the small one-off sites that have zero technical knowledge or whatever else to get them taken care of, as well as big enterprises with huge amount of investment, right? We want to make sure that we craft a solution that works for everybody who might need it and also is approachable, to get it going. So
awesome. Greg, do you have anything to add to that? Other concerns about end of life as people continue to use Drupal 7? And I'm kind of curious from the perspective, just as maybe as a site owner rather than as a Drupal security team member perspective.
Yeah. I mean, as a site owner, when you, the community you start to have to make a commitment to maintaining the site a bit more than you might when it was the leading version of the platform, right? And so like if you go into a Drupal 7 queue now, you say, or you go into a Drupal 10 queue, you're going to see other people reporting issues, other people trying things out and finding those issues. Whereas in the Drupal 7 world, you're now more likely to see like the bug that you're about to report isn't there yet, and there's not a patch available yet. And so you're more likely to have to make the report yourself, make the patch yourself, or hire somebody to do that for you. So, that's what I think about, I guess, is the commitment, the increased like operational commitment that's required the longer you go on. And so, I think that Dave made a good point about how there's a lot of different kinds of organizations that are using Drupal, big, small, different sizes of development staff. Are those developers in-house? Are they hired out? And, I think that that's an important problem for folks to try to figure out in working with the Drupal community is how do we craft something that's going to be approachable and workable for lots of different kinds of organizations.
Greg, I want to jump back to something you said a little bit earlier. Yeah. And the fact that Drupal 7 right now is in extended community support, right? And just like, what exactly is that? Like, obviously from the wording, I can infer that like the community is supporting Drupal 7. Does that mean like the DA isn't supporting it? It's not being like supported at certain levels of like that Drupal 9 and Drupal 10 are being supported? Like, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so Drupal, the Drupal Association provides support by providing the infrastructure, the test bots, things like that. Like that's the Drupal Association involvement, and some level of gathering information and like helping people to get coordinated. But it's really about the community and how they're coming together to provide support for these things. So and then of course like some companies like who are maybe competitors in certain situations, but they're also cooperating in other situations. So we can see how the different maintainers of Drupal 7 right now are still working on patches in the public queue, are still making commits periodically, still making new releases periodically. I mentioned like maintaining browser compatibility, JavaScript compatibility, things like that. So fixing bugs like that, fixing bugs for PHP versions. So, Drupal, of course, has lots of PHP code, it's got to be able to work. It's got to run on the current supported versions of PHP. So that's where some effort goes in as well. Yeah.
You also talked about, and we've talked about, long-term support. How is that different than extended community support? We want to get all the labels and the names and the things here understood well.
I'm happy to jump in, but Greg, I'd love to hear it from you, right? We've had a chance to collaborate on some of this, so.
Yeah, well, so, Drupal 6 had a long-term support program, LTS, and that's what, it was called at the time. I think to try to put that in more generic terms, it's just additional support that's paid beyond the point where the community stops providing support for it. So those are, you're not getting volunteers doing it through the Drupal security team. You've got a paid contract with somebody who's providing that long-term support. With Drupal 7, several years ago, there was exploration of a program that I think was maybe called vendor extended support or vendor support, extended support, things like that, to highlight the fact that this is a vendor provided thing. There are a couple of different companies that committed to that idea. And I think with the extensions that were provided by the community, that stopped being a viable business model for them, or they felt that it wasn't a viable business. That sort of brings us up to the moment where, we've got hero devs saying, we think that there's a viable business here. And with the concept of never-ending support, which I think is a great name for it, I also think that there's a viable business there. So never-ending support, I think, is a great name for what this is as a point after the end of the community-provided support through the standard group of volunteers on the Drupal security team.
You made it click for me, Greg, where you're community support or extended community support is typically a free venture where the community is supporting a thing, and then everything else could be a paid endeavor depending on what it is.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was just going to ask, with the long-term support that's paid, that's a valid business thing. What happens to the code that is written to fix bugs that is paid for by other entities? Does that code go back into the community? Does it only get committed to the branches for those particular companies that pay for it? How is that realized? Is it realized as a benefit for the community?
It's typically a commercial benefit at that point, a commercial venture where the IP's got quite a bit more requirements, and so it's not provided freely away. Let me give you an example. When you sell support versus write Drupal and give it away for free, when you sell that support, your customers will make you indemnify them in a court of law if any of the IP you're creating violates a third-party IP rights claim. And because of that, where you have, an uncapped liability to protect someone or defend a company or a government in court, it's not something that you can typically give away or float back to the community. So it makes it a little tricky to do community contributions beyond the end of life, the way that it's currently modeled. So not typically, though it doesn't mean we would never contribute back to the community. It just means it's typically extremely difficult to make those contributions.
So does that mean you're actually maintaining more than one branch of the original Drupal 7, the last known community edition?
It could mean that. It currently doesn't mean that. It currently means we're maintaining the last supported version by the DA or by the community. That's the version we're supporting. I'll let Dave or Greg take over that one.
Yeah, I'll throw in a quip here, right? I've heard LTS described as it's support with a guarantee. I think a lot of times it's actually more support with a sacrifice, meaning if you botch it, there is a sacrifice to be made for not doing a good job of it, right? And that's usually where the commercial expectation comes from. You can rely on somebody actually funded to be there to do it based on whatever SLA or parameters. But yeah, to the point that Frosty was talking about there, we typically refer to it as like the fork point. There comes a time along the journey, right, of this open source project where we do need to actually take a fork of where it's at. And ideally, we try and get as late in the process as possible to keep up with the open source initiative and keep in sync and start to contribute there where we can, right, as we start to spin up our efforts and do the security scanning and all those kind of things. But there definitely is kind of a before and after, like we forked at this version, this junction in the road. And typically we'll mirror through the end of life and other notable things, which is something we share openly, right? And and then wherever possible, we do try and contribute back. That's a big part of some of the ongoing evolution with the Drupal community.
And so Drupal 7 never-ending support, this is like our 4th product that we're providing never-ending support for.
Okay.
So typically we aim to support just the tip of the last known supported version. However, it's happened already where a big part of the community will be on not the tip, they'll be on a prior version. So as we see groupings of community members that are stuck on, maybe N-1 or N-10, if there's clusters of people on the same version, we do provide this same vendor provided support for other versions than just a tip. Though typically our goal is to support just like the latest known version at the end of life moment. So like it's kind of variable. I suspect we'll have a couple different options for the Drupal 7 community.
There's something that's always been in the back of my mind with these types of services, and we're not lawyers and this isn't meant as a gotcha, but I'm curious how and I was curious about this for the Drupal 6 version too, but I'm curious how this is how this works with the Drupal licensing, right? Drupal's new GPL, right? Which means that you have the right to distribute, modify, change, however. But how does that work when you're moving essentially portions of that into a commercial enterprise? I'm just curious how that works. That's one piece that
great question, Nick. I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it can change by open source project, and it actually takes a lot of focus to get this one right. And it's actually pretty tough because as you're, as an engineer, we understand code, and some of us understand a little bit licensing. But even those of us who get really deep on the licensing and understanding what does a derivative work, what do I have to do to satisfy GPL versus a different license, not everyone can keep up on those conversations, including even like, an $800 an hour lawyer who their whole life is software licensing. Not even they can keep up on what is it going to take to make this work. And so it's tough to have these conversations and find people who can keep up on the conversation of what does the licensing model look like so that you're not immediately in violation of, the GPL license. So I'll say that it looks similar to like a Red Hat licensing model where there's kind of a dual licensing scenario going on. You're paying for access to the Hero Dev support team, and along with that access, you're getting free access to the versions of software that we're providing as well. And so as a paying customer for support, you're gaining access to free access and a perpetual license to these supported and continually maintained versions of open source projects like Drupal 7.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't meant as a gotcha, but it's something that I've always wondered about because like as a developer, I write custom code as well for clients all the time to glue things together, and it like as you said, I've tried to understand it really well, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure my understanding isn't perfect either.
I think to give you like a short answer, it's the dual licensing model that makes it work. And if you go look at Red Hat, they've got a really solid dual licensing model that works. And so I think that's the quick answer.
So by definition, then, if you are under a dual licensing model, then you can't make contributions back to the community code because you have signed an agreement with a commercial entity to protect them and their interests. And so if you're supporting the fork of Drupal 7 that is the most recent, that is the last one that comes from the community, you have to make those commits to the fork that is specific to that client so that they're indemnified, right? And then, like, isn't then the logic that then you can't bring that into any of the other forks for any of your other clients? And this is also not a gotcha. I'm just trying to understand this, just like Nick is asking questions, because that was the logical place where I went here.
Yeah, so the license is, you pay for access to a never-ending support team that's scanning and fixing, and they're answering emails and they're taking phone calls, and they're here 24/7, and they're giving you an SLA, which is something that,
Right.
Drupal 7 will not have experienced an enterprise-grade SLA. So this is kind of a new feature for customers, is getting a guaranteed SLA on top of it. Along with that SLA, you're getting a free license to a bunch of software that we provide, one of those things being Drupal 7 never-ending supported versions. So as we release to you free versions of the software, and you maintain access to those perpetually, that is in compliance with GPL. The reason that we can't willy-nilly give our IP away is because along a license to that code, inside the license is indemnification protections to any of the updates, and that's a capital U on updates, just for anyone legally listening. Any of those capital U updates, now I have to go and like take, if someone were to come at you and say, hey, you have this update that has it contains a third-party IP from us, and we're going to sue you for violating our IP rights. I have to indemnify anyone who's got that in their code base. And that's this weird thing that doesn't appear when you give away the code for free. Like, the Drupal Association doesn't get a lot of people waving the heavy-handed stick of indemnification threats. And, some of my other partners at like the Vue Foundation and the Angular team, they're not generally threatened or demanded to provide indemnity support inside a court of law. But the second you ask for a penny or more for a piece of software, the indemnity protections like get through the roof. And like, I don't mean to be anecdotal or like pick on one of the biggest companies in the world, but I was very much not in the happiest place on earth when I had to talk to some lawyers at a very big organization that they, basically said, we'll sue you out of existence if there's an IP rights violation in this software. And that's like a really scary day when you're like, I just am trying to help a community here, kids. Like, what is this threat about? And so lawyers and developers, totally different, like on the friendliness level of like life. So
it sounds to me like Hero Devs is a 40% developer, 60% lawyer sort of company, right?
I mean, I would say it's 40% development, 60% risk, but most of our employees are developers. I'm a developer, Dave's a developer, Greg's here. Most of our team is engineers, and we have probably of the 70 people, probably 10 of them are not engineers. So yeah.
Let's take a 60 steps back, right?
Okay.
And ask the softball question, because if you've listened to previous shows, we've talked about Hero Devs as they're a sponsor of Talking Drupal, but in the area of long-term support or your product never-ending support, what does Hero Devs do? Because I think you guys have like a really interesting business model of like coming in and kind of like saving the day. So Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about what Hero Devs does?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for the question. So like Drupal 7, that has a fantastic community with a deep history, very good at like cross educating and cross teaching each other how to use and get better at this. There's other communities out there, like where we started was in the Angular community, and these, you know, about 90 to 95% of these communities, like the Drupal community, don't really care about what I do. And that's great. That means that they either have the opportunity to migrate, which is fantastic for them, or they're not regulated by like an entity that's going to like threaten their existence if they have an unsupported piece of like Drupal 7, for example, after the end of life. They're not going to be regulated out of existence. And so for 95% of the community, that's great. But for about 5% of our communities, they find themselves with a literal, like a metaphorical gun placed at the side of their product, where it's like, hey, like I'll give you a couple examples. Like if you sell into the American government, after the end of life of Drupal 7 on January 5th, your app is no longer FedRAMP compliant. So when you sold it to the government, you said, hey, this will always be FedRAMP compliant. And now you find yourself in the precarious scenario where you didn't migrate, and maybe it was because the government didn't give you enough money to migrate. It's like, it's not even your own fault. But you've got a problem where the government may now come sue you for the total replacement cost of the app and or the project. And so Hero Devs for that example would say, hey, for an extremely nominal fee, you're going to be able to tell the American government you're supported, that you have an SLA that meets FedRAMP requirements, and you are going to be safe, and the government partner that you're working with is going to be safe. Like, that's one example. Another one is people write SLAs to their own customers, and then they take something and they put it on a server and they sell the server. And that SLA, now they don't control the environment where the app is running anymore, but there's still an SLA on that environment. So they have no ability to force a user to upgrade from, you know, D7, Angular 1, whatever the end of life software is. And but that customer has an SLA that they can point back at them and really threaten these businesses to the point where they may even, you know, cease to exist if any of these actions got taken against them. So Hero Devs represents for them at a nominal cost. We're kind of socializing the cost of the maintenance across all of our customers. Pay for this collectively, and we will keep you all safe collectively. And no one has to go like dead or out of business tonight. So that's kind of the concept, is we take what the original open source team was doing during long-term support, or, you know, what you guys have called community support, and we extend that support indefinitely with an SLA on top of it. And that SLA is very meaningful. And then on top of the SLA, we are forced to provide indemnification protections if there were ever any sort of third-party IP rights violations inside the updates we provide. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell.
So to distill that down into, like, I don't know, a sentence or two, right? It sounds like you guys come in to end of life software and provide support, necessary code updates, and some level of legal protection if things go sideways for your clients.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And every day we're adding more pieces of software. The catalog is expanding every single day.
How many pieces of software are you at right now?
We're about 25 different libraries, and we're kind of on the edge of an agreement with the Linux Foundation and the Open JavaScript Foundation to become this kind of de facto never-ending support provider for the projects that are under the governance of those two foundations. So our catalog's about to go up by an order of magnitude or two, where we should have products that every business needs support for. And a lot of how we pick our products is we watch what's happening, like with Drupal 7. We watched it from afar and started making relationships with Tim Doyle and people like Greg to see if we could provide value here. And then others, our existing customers, start begging us, hey, support Spring Framework, support jQuery 1, or they demand other pieces of software that we then start providing support for them.
My
So
head hurts. My head hurts just thinking of like supporting 5 or even just one piece of software, but 25 plus is like, whew, that's talent.
I was gonna say, like, there's definitely some opportunity there, you know, evidenced by your company, but having worked with enterprise level companies on massive installations of Drupal 7, on some level, I don't envy what you guys do. It can be a lot of work to, you know, changes that might take 2 hours of work in Drupal 10 can sometimes take 10, 12, 15, 20 hours in older versions of software. Some of it's just remembering where to change it in Drupal 7 versus Drupal 10.
And kind of to your point, like supporting a framework is different than supporting an app, or because like we can all drive cars, but very few of us can like be our own mechanics. And that's a lot like we can all use Drupal 7, but that doesn't mean I can maintain Drupal 7. Certainly, even if I could as a stability, not as a security. So it's really a unique type of engineer that we're building a team out of. And so it adds to the complexity of providing support for the 25 libraries that we're talking about already. So yeah.
Dave, I'm gonna point this question clarification at you, right? So Hero Devs is supporting all of this software, right? But like you guys are supporting your clients, so that means like not only are you kind of if I got you right, correct me if I'm wrong, don't want to misstate, but like if I'm understanding what you're saying, like you're not only supporting Drupal 7, but you're also supporting your client's custom code as well, right?
No, that's where the distinction is. So yeah, I felt like I collectively watched everyone's face go, oh, the fear and then the excitement of it, right? No, we very much solve problems in the aggregate, right? The best way to put it, right, when you were boiling it down for me is we keep things running where they were running, right? So if you have an environment that it was running in and things are working there, and you know your only problem really is a compliance or security related to that actual environment, like we are commercially bound to keep that going. And it makes so much sense because how many times have engineers, right, app engineers, you show up to work one day, right, you're one of 200 engineers at an enterprise or whatever it is, and like you've got a 2-year backlog of things, and suddenly your project manager, your product owner, whatever it is, says, okay, forget all the work you're going to do. Somebody just dropped a new version of something or deprecated an old version. We're going to spend the next 6 months migrating to hopefully have the same application at the end of the road. It's crazy, right? But we're just used to it. And so, our goal is to give you control of your schedule with that.
So you guys are basically jumping in to where the Drupal community is ending to keep the train going.
Yes. And
yes,
I spent like 14 of my, now 18 years of my career beating up vendors, like buying software like this and hating them for it. And so when I talked with Aaron about doing this, I was very morally conflicted and even worried that people are going to come beat me up for my past as a hypocrite. But we start, every conversation with customers saying, migrate, go to the latest version. 10 has all this great stuff. I'm not even in the Drupal world directly enough to know that like where 10 kills 7, right? But I know that everybody who does loves it. So you should go do that first, and if you can.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was actually going to ask later on, like, do you feel like this is going to prevent people from upgrading to the latest and greatest? But because you guys are like, go to the latest and greatest if you can,
it's
one of the things, like over half of our employees are consultants, where we will take any of the customers that are asking us to provide never-ending support for their libraries, and that consulting team like hire us. We'll migrate your code for you. Like we're not here to preach bad practices, stay on legacy code for forever. We find that we make more money as a partner by teaching the best ways to migrate faster. And then on the people who cannot migrate, and I know that's a hard concept for engineers. It was hard for me at first. These people literally cannot migrate. And those people end up falling in love with us for a different reason. And so we're trying to provide value on both sides of the coin, seriously.
So
That makes so much more sense.
Next week's show, we're going to be talking about some of the costs around Drupal, right? And like, it's definitely like there are some people that are in this position right now where they cannot afford to upgrade to Drupal 10, right? They're kind of like, you know, a nonprofit, an educational institution, like you name it. They do not have the funds to be able to make that switch, or they just don't like, they maybe don't have the talent. There are a lot of scenarios where people just can't upgrade. I think like there is a frustration there because we feel like everybody should be able to upgrade, but the reality is that like, it's just not possible for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's another class of that too. And these people probably may not be your customers, Aaron and Dave, but you know, Drupal 7 was very easy for somebody who was not technical to set up a site and get it running, right? And nowadays there were one-click installs on GoDaddy and Media Temple, and it was super easy to get set up. And nowadays, and you didn't have Wix, you didn't have, you know, Squarespace, you didn't have those self-builders. So people spent a little bit of extra effort that it took to get it set up. And now, you know, a lot of those people, they'll be migrating to Squarespace or Wix. But I have some deeper. Go ahead, Aaron.
I wanted to add one more thing here because I really want to expose a truth about what we're doing here. We worked really hard to gain the trust of the Drupal Association, and they asked us to do a lot of leaning in financially and a lot of leaning in technically before they could say, yeah, we actually trust you guys. The trust from them is, how can we, you know, do what Greg talked about? How can we definitely turn off this support, but know that we're not absolutely abandoning the community? What about the people who we know can't migrate? Let's try and find a partner that they can work with. And so I feel like, as the person who was heavily scrutinized by the Drupal Association, that they were very focused on saying, hey, let's make sure we have a partner here for these people that we can trust. And so the Drupal Association asked us a lot of questions, and they asked us to lean in very heavily. They asked about our relationships with Google, our relationships with Microsoft, our relationships with the over 700 paying enterprise clients that we have for our solutions. And they really, at the end, they wanted to make sure, hey, we're communicating to the community a partner that they can trust. And so I really feel like the Drupal Association, and who I interfaced with was Tim Doyle, you know, the CEO. I felt like he did a fantastic job of making sure that the community had a partner they could trust.
Awesome. So this next question, I think, is a mix of all three of you guys. And there's three parts to this. I'm curious specifically what Hero Dev's Never Ending Support will do for people on Drupal 7. So for example, Dave, earlier you mentioned your plan is to keep people running in the environment that they are in. And so for example, PHP versions, right? If somebody's on version 7.1, which is no longer supported either, right? Are you also supporting PHP, or are you trying to get Drupal updated for 8.3 and get them there? Like, how does the underlying architecture of those applications work? Or are you explicitly only managing Drupal 7 code essentially?
Part of what we're trying to do is keep you supported where you're running. And when a customer comes to me and says, hey, I need Drupal 7 support, I know they also need PHP 7 support. And so we've got support for PHP 7 for those customers as well. So if they come in and say, hey, I need a supported version of PHP, I need a supported version of Drupal 7, and I need an SLA and supported versions of these 400 modules. That's the type of conversation they can have with us. And then they can know we're good going forward to keep the app as it is. Hero Devs is going to keep us supported.
So it might be, so it's a little bit, sounds like it might be a little bit a la carte, right? So if I'm a Drupal 7 site that's on PHP 7, then I need PHP 7 and Drupal 7 support. If I'm a Drupal 7 site at 8.3, well, Drupal 8.3 is supported right now, but if I'm still with you guys in 2 years, when 8.3 becomes end of life, you'll need to add an additional line item for 8.3. If I have Solar, whatever old version of Solar is out there now, like, That makes sense. So it's not really just. It's very different, I think, than the Drupal 6 end of life, because the Drupal 6 end of life, not end of life, extended support was more. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg. You'll probably know better, but Drupal 6 extended support was more. We're just gonna backport security fixes for X number of time for an X amount of fee. Whereas
I think, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And that the Drupal 6 long-term support vendors relied on people getting support for PHP at a different place, or like, you know, or not getting it. But, you know, they were looking at that as like, we're providing this, you know, put a box around just the Drupal 6 stuff. And it's, you know, I would say backporting, but also it's important to provide like a target, to provide like a catch point for any new reports, because there is a possibility that a researcher is going to find a vulnerability that just affects the old version that's now in like this extended support arena. So you need to provide not just backports, but also that that like point of contact or catch point for new reports as well.
So
and if I could keep going deeper, just to kind of go down your guys' point, you know, standard in Drupal 7 is CK Editor, which has unsupported versions. So if you're like, hey, I got to have support for CK Editor, talk to Hero Devs. If you're like, also standard in Drupal 7 is jQuery 1.x, which is unsupported and has multiple known security vulnerabilities. So we actually want to move over to Hero Devs' version of jQuery and stop using, you know, the out of the box jQuery that's the ship. Great, work with us. There's a myriad of options where you're like, hey, I need to, what supported means for each of you is a different answer, and what supported means for each of my customers is different. I'm over here doing the acrobatics to be able to sign an agreement that says, I'll support all your stuff, I'll keep you guys okay, and you don't have to spend a $50,000 or $250,000 fee to get ready to take on our products. We can just let you flip some switches and implement us in the next 20 minutes, and you're good to go. Yeah.
I just want to, something just dropped, a penny just dropped for me, I think. And I think it was the phrase you used about switching from jQuery 1.x to Hero Dev's version of jQuery. And did I understand that correctly? That when you said flip a few switches and get you supported, what you're actually doing is you're replacing some of the libraries in some cases with Hero Devs supported, Hero Devs evolved, Hero Devs patched, Hero Devs versions of libraries that fundamentally do the same thing but are maybe better, more secure. Did I get that?
That's the nail on the head. And the tricky part, though, we started talking about it in the layers, right? Because you've got Drupal up here, you've got the PHP runtime, you've got the operating system down here, you've got Nginx versus, you know, Apache versus whatever else web server that you have, and all these different bindings there. So yeah, the PHP ecosystem, just in general, the matrix of support across things can get really burly really fast. And then as you go look at compatibility testing, you'll see that, right? So our challenge is to find the right level of solution that allows both the individualized like support level that you need or you can afford or whatever else, as well as, you know, centralizing the work to get that done across the many people.
Now, and how does that work with hosts? Because, for example, and this is something John just added, but hosts eventually hosts go, you know what, this is no longer supported, and they shut it down.
Yeah.
Do you handle like host migrations and things too, and set up those versions, or what do you do in that case?
Yeah, so we're having those conversations today. I'll give you an example. Like a few months ago, GoDaddy generally brokered a supported version of PHP 7 for all of their users, right? They kind of did a collective bargaining agreement for anyone hosted using PHP 7. GoDaddy was purchasing a supported version of PHP 7 for them. That type of agreement could go with us, where it's like, hey, Pantheon could come to me and say, hey, I want to purchase the opportunity for anyone on D7 to have D7 NES as part of like their options. Great. Like I'll do a collectively bargained agreement for Pantheon, and I would actually welcome the phone call with them. And we've got phone calls with an array of channel partners, is what we call them, to try to get this out to as many people as possible with the least amount of lawyers, if I can be frank, and just get this. Everyone can be supported with the least amount of code movement by the community. So I am working on doing that, but lest the partners and I come to an agreement, which I'm ready to come to an agreement any day, then I have to sell this one at a time, which I will do, but it does make it a little slower.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I just wanted to explain my face for the folks that may be watching this on video. I am not a huge fan of GoDaddy, so that's just the face. Everything else Aaron said was lovely. I just GoDaddy, boo.
I think that there's a lot of people who feel like you, John.
I think the face was mutual, bro. I think a lot of people made the face too, so it makes sense.
So I'm going to direct this next one to you, Greg, but feel free to jump in, Dave or Aaron. What does it look like for security? Is it more, because one of the things I learned in the last couple of years with the Drupal security team is it's more in general. I mean, I know there's people on the Acquia team and platform and Pantheon, so they see a lot of incoming stuff and kind of proactively look there. But in general, a lot of Drupal security stuff is community driven, just like anything else. The difference is that there's a dedicated team to evaluate, address them, and respond. And I've reported security issues before, and I know Stephen has, and they get addressed very quickly, incredibly quickly. I mean, the security team does great. Does that change with Hero Devs? Is it a little bit more proactive with running tools and looking for stuff, since it's an older code base, or is it still kind of not community driven but client driven, I guess would be the question.
I mean, I can speak a little bit about the volunteer side. Thanks for the kind words, by the way. But on the volunteer side, I would just say that it's like a best effort basis or a reasonable effort maybe among volunteers. Yeah. And so on the community side, we have rotations for who's on triage duty, different things like that, to try to ensure that there is a quick response, but there is not a service level agreement behind it, right? And what the security team is doing is facilitating the process. I think that's like one of the best words to describe what the security team is doing. So we facilitate by validating the report, trying to understand the report, trying to make sure that it makes sense for the maintainers, whether that's the core maintainers or contributed project maintainers. And then we invite them into the issue if we do think that there's like something legitimate vulnerability there. Maintainers have questions. Sometimes we'll try to answer those. We facilitate writing up the security advisories. Again, maintainers are supposed to be providing majority of the content, but having those be consistent. There's the risk scores that are calculated. So it's like just facilitating all of those steps in the process until ultimately it gets published following the schedule. So tomorrow is, as we're recording this, tomorrow is a core release window, so we won't be doing any contributed projects, and so we're just like scheduling things out into the future. But if a maintainer is just like, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm not going to work on this thing, I don't think this is real, whatever, we can appeal to them, we can try to like communicate with them and try to say like, hey, would you please do this? But then ultimately the one tool that we actually have is just saying like, this module is not supported anymore. And that is like the last resort of the security team to say that a module is no longer supported through the security advisory process, because it is so disruptive to the community and it creates so much pain. So, that's like a description of the Drupal process. And one thing that I've appreciated about Hero Devs is that they're like, tell us about what the Drupal community is doing really well, and tell us about what you think, this is getting to my role as product advisor, but I'm working with them to say like, here's how you can design a system that will be like an ideal situation for these enterprise customers or for these different kinds of customers that you're working with, and for the security researchers who will in the future be collaborators with the Hero Devs never-ending support.
So if I could, I want to jump in on one other side of the equation for what we just talked about. So,
Yeah, go for it.
and
Sure.
the TLDR, right? Greg described it better, and we're still obviously in flux in designing a lot of this, and it's going to evolve as the community evolves, as EUL approaches, and all those things. But I think that the TLDR on it is our process will, adopt and expand and build upon the foundation of security that was already provided, right? So the way that you report things, the way that things get processed, the way that, updates get out and all those kind of things, it's going to feel very natural to the community, right? Our ideal is that, day 1, day 2, day 3 comes around of switching over to NES. It's just as natural as it was before. But the side I want to point out, because it's actually the most fun part of this, especially if you've come from like the open source background, is we're a well-funded organization, right? We have a lot of big customers. They have a lot of needs. And because of that, we have access to all the big commercial, kind of the big boy toys, right? So software that costs $30,000, $40,000 a year to license to scan your code, we actually can point that at a lot of these solutions. And while some of those have, open source licenses that they allow, that's SetDog, by the way. While some of those have those things, right, or available, or there's some level of like community scanning and whatnot, there's just a lot of stuff that you don't get from having a, commercial, budget to be able to do that. And so for us, it's really fun when we get to kind of point some of these, both, commercial off-the-shelf products, internally developed things, community things, whatever else, point this big cannon at a group, a grouping of software or a big code base that never really had this kind of treatment before. All sorts of bells and whistles go off. And again, we focus specifically on security and compatibility, but the quality is really there.
I actually think that's where a lot of the, Greg, you probably have a lot of insight into this, but I think that's where a lot of the security things come from, especially in core, when a new large organization launches a site and then they run their tools against it, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of different flags, and then a fix drops for it. I know that I've reported a couple of things that way.
Yeah, it's definitely the case. And I would say it's like a combination of not just the tools, but the tools and somebody who has the time and expertise to dive into it, validate the issue. Yep. It's the combination of the tool and the person working with the data that really makes it valuable. But certainly it's the case. And I would recommend this to anybody considering Drupal, right? Like, please periodically get penetration tests, right? Please periodically get code audits, because that's how the community gets better.
And report those back to the community, please.
Yeah, I might be a dum-dum here. So brace yourselves, folks. Greg, true or false, at the end of this year, when Drupal is end of life, the security team will stop covering Drupal. Is that accurate?
Drupal 7.
7. Sorry. Yes, Drupal 7.
Right. So the volunteer community Drupal security team will stop, January 5th, 2025, will stop providing support for Drupal 7.
Right.
And all Drupal 7 core and all contributed projects.
And all of our listeners are like, man, you're an idiot, John. Like, what have you guys been talking about for the last 45 minutes? So once that happens, like, you just don't submit issues like that you find to Drupal 7, or is there like a spot where you can submit them, or is it just like open a ticket and hope somebody sees it? Like, how does that work?
I think that's part of why I think it's important to have relationships with people who are providing that support, and that's part of why I'm interested in having a relationship with Hero Devs, is so that we somebody right, like, so there's somebody who's like got this tool, or they're a penetration tester themselves, and they're probing manually, whatever they're doing to try to find a vulnerability. They're going to find it where they're paid to do it, or where they care to do it. And sometimes that happens to be on Drupal 7, and we'll get reports about Drupal 7 that, it turns out it affects Drupal 10 as well, right? And so we do need coordination around that, but that where that reporting point, as I was mentioning, like, it will need to shift to being like, if the researcher doesn't believe it affects a modern version of Drupal, it will need to shift to somewhere else. And that's a major service that Hero Devs can provide, is to be that target, that catch point for a researcher looking to report it.
I will say this: anything that is found and fixed for HeroDev's customers on Drupal 7 NES. We will, once it's released to our customers for a while, we will report that back out to MITRE so that everyone downstream has the benefit of at least knowing that they're vulnerable and having the opportunity to attempt to mitigate this on their own. So we're committed to contributing to reporting those publicly for everyone to know.
Awesome.
How does that affect Drupal Steward? Does it affect Drupal Steward?
Good question.
As you know, Drupal Steward is a product of Drupal Association and the Drupal security team. So, you know, like of the many hats I wear, Drupal Association is not one of them. And so I don't want to like speak too much about the exact plans, but my guess is that Drupal Steward will cease supporting Drupal 7 at the end of life point, you know, January 5th, 2025.
But before we move on to your question, Aaron, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't ask, and I understand this answer is probably going to be we don't really know yet, and it really is a la carte, but can you give us a general order of magnitude of cost to support Drupal 7? Like, is it going to be 3 figures a month, 4 figures a month, 5 figures a month, just so our listeners kind of know what to plan for their budget?
$9.95 and you get a cool decoder ring.
Yeah, you get a sham wow at the end. Yeah. And if you buy now in the next 5 minutes, it's free shipping. Yeah, no.
He's kidding, by the way, folks. People take you seriously. Those
you
people
do have to pay for shipping. Yeah. So you should expect, as you look at your Drupal 7 project, and you sit back and you say, "Hey, what's my cost to migrate here to D10?" And let's just throw out a number. Let's say it's $1 million, because that's not unreasonable. HeroDevs aims to be about 2% of that during the year. So we're trying to be less than the cost of financing to get a loan for $1 million. Like, we're aiming to be extremely reasonable, extremely reasonably priced.
I'm migrating the wrong sites. I just have to say that.
Yeah, no. Holy cow. I would love. Agree.
You're not wrong. Yeah. You're not wrong.
Well, I mean, scales of magnitude, though, right? You guys are probably working with like Fortune 500 companies that have like hundreds of sites on Drupal 7 where they're like, oh, if we have to migrate all these, we're going to eat it hardcore, right?
And a lot of them have like a 0 downtime SLA to downstream customers, where if they violate that, they're paying back a quarter's worth of revenue, right, to each customer, or, you know, those high intensity environments. So
makes sense. And that's great to kind of level set, so our people listening kind of know what to expect. So, I said,
I'll also, as far as like our target customer, like just to kind of, if you're listening and you're like, I wonder if I need some of this never-ending action. If you're not like in an industry where someone's going to shut down your website if you're not compliant, like I'm just kind of I'm just kind of floating out there. I'm not really that important to you. But if you're in a scenario where you're processing healthcare data and there's a HIPAA compliance audit that you're now not going to pass, which means you might have to shut down your site, you're in a risky scenario, and you should probably at least call me to discuss your options, so that in February 2025, when the auditor walks in, you're not forced to shut down your app. Or if you're in a scenario where you sell to the government, I kind of pointed this one out, you're going to need to have a supported version shipped to them before the end of life, not purchase HeroDev support like after the end of life, but you actually need to have in their hands the supported HeroDevs version like on the end of life on January 5th. So like, you may not need me, and if you don't know you need me, you probably don't need to work with us, and just keep doing your migration. I think that's the best way. And call HeroDevs. We'll give you some of the best tips, and we'll even help you with an architectural assessment to help you get ready to migrate. And so we'll help you. But if you don't know you need us, you probably don't. But if you're in any sort of a legally tenuous situation, you probably should give us a call. So just to help you gauge if you're one of our potential clients or not.
No, that's super helpful. Because like I said, we to put a finer point on it, right? If it's a plumber site with 5 pages on it and a contact form, they probably should just be migrating to
Plumbers get
Squarespace
sued
with, like,
all the time, Nick.
Yeah. Or if you're a plumber, it probably doesn't matter. Like, you're probably okay staying on D7 as long as your platform will support it, right?
As
So,
long as the toilet flushes.
or doesn't.
Greg, you had talked about all the different hats that you wear. And I wanted to ask about the hat that's specifically connected to Hero Devs, because we've been talking about Hero Devs. What do you do as the product advisor there?
Sure. And I even have 2 hats that I wear within Hero Devs. I just love hats. So product advisor, helping, talking about like that ability to hook into the update status module to provide good advice. If somebody's a Hero Devs customer, when they look at their site reports, they want to see a report that makes sense for them with their set of contributed modules, with their set of core, those kinds of things, so that they know, yes, a new release has come from Hero Devs, even though the community isn't releasing that anymore. So giving advice about those kinds of elements of the product. And that's part of my like product advisor role. And then the other side is that Hero Devs is sponsoring community time. So we came up with a list of different projects that would be helpful to the Drupal community and to Hero Devs, and I am sponsored to work on those projects as well. So I think when I first, my day job is like working at Morris Animal Foundation. I love seeing the dogs. Morris Animal Foundation works to keep dogs healthy. And when I first was talking with Hero Devs folks, and they were like, "Oh, we just want to get your advice as the Drupal security team person," and I said, "Well, here's one bit of advice. You should get an account on Drupal.org, create your organization page, and become a community partner with the Drupal Association." And they were like, "Oh yeah, that's obviously the right thing to do." And then I think it was like 2 or 3 days later, boom, it was done. Like the contribution to Drupal Association had happened, partnership was like rolling along. And so that, to me, I was like, oh, this is a group of folks who gets it and who moves quick, right? Like I love the idea of being a product advisor in that kind of environment, right? That's kind of dreamy. So really appreciate the values that the Hero Devs folks bring to this environment, and just how they're like, yeah, we know about end of life. We've been through this with 25 products now. And that knowledge helps to inform how they approach, for example, Drupal 7. Yeah.
So, Greg, you work for a nonprofit right now. And
Yes.
If you go to your D.O profile, it says you did a tour of duty on the Colorado Digital Service. I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that experience and, kind of what you did with your time there.
Sure. So it's for folks who aren't really familiar with that, like a tour of service in the government for a technologist model. There's 18F and the U.S. Digital Service at the federal level are 2 programs that the state of Colorado just sort of started doing that in the fall of 2019. And I had liked the idea. I was interested in the idea, but I wanted to stay in Colorado, right? I love Colorado more than Washington, D.C. Sorry, like it's fine, but whatever.
It's understandable.
Different strokes for different folks, right? And so when they started it up in Colorado, I was like, oh, that's it. I got to apply. And it is sort of a sabbatical model where they want people to sign up for 6 months to 2 years time frame. It's not intended to be a lifelong commitment, but it is intended to bring in folks with different career experiences or career trajectories than might traditionally apply to government. I think there's a sense that government jobs are like a lifetime commitment. And so it's bringing in a different set of folks. And I happened to start February of 2020, pretty interesting time to be working for the government. And it was, the team of folks that I worked with was just top notch, just absolutely amazing. And it was really, COVID situations aside, just really interesting to get to see the different ways that government procures software, builds software, manages software, and the people and processes behind it all. I came away with a ton of respect for those folks, and highly recommend, if anybody's thinking about this idea of a digital service, tour of service, that I would recommend checking it out, looking for an opportunity.
So just out of curiosity, you said it's like a sabbatical. Did you get paid from the government for this, or was it something that worked out through your employer? Like, yes, you can go and like, we'll keep paying you. Like, how's that work?
No. Yeah. I meant sabbatical loosely. Like, it's not meant to be,
Okay.
Morris Hamlet Foundation did not pay for me to go do that. The state of Colorado did pay me. You become an employee of the state. Massachusetts has a program like that. Georgia has a program like that. There's other states who have these programs that are popping up. State of California does as well. Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Greg, Aaron, Dave, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate you guys having us on and letting us talk about what we do. Appreciate what you guys do for the community too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're the only shop that loves old software. So if you ever want to talk old code, come hit us up.
Man, that feels like it could be a show all of its own.
We've talked about it. It might be
this old code. No lawsuits.
Nice.
No lawsuits there.
Yeah, right.
I will also say we do have unlimited PTO, annual offsites in Cancun, a really killer company culture, and the ability to work entirely remotely. So if anyone hates those things, you won't like working at Hero Devs. But if you like those things, maybe look us up, because we are growing pretty rapidly. So,
yeah, I mean, 25 plus things that you guys support. You guys need people to support them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For our listeners, if you have any questions or feedback, you can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle of Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our host and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, as we bring this show in for a landing, Greg, if folks wanted to get a hold of you to either report a security issue or just talk about security issues in general, or nonprofits or government service, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the place that I'll mention is drupal.community/@Greggles, the Drupal community Mastodon instance. And my thanks to the folks who set that up and are running it.
There you go. Aaron, what about you?
The easiest way to get hold of me is hello@Hero Devs. And I'm here to talk about whatever you need, however I can help, or whatever advice we could give. So let us know. Thanks.
And Dave, you now cannot use hello@Hero Devs. So how could folks get a hold of you?
I'm amazed, but Frost really does use that. He's the most dangerous one. No, I'm probably best on Twitter or X if you're really up to date on that. Just David_Welch. I run a unsupported software support group. So if you just need a hug, like, there's a long line of AngularJS people, but a couple newcomers to different technology. No, I really love talking about old software with people, and as bad as that might suck, it's actually really fun in our job. It's none of the terrible parts of old software and a lot of creative problem solving. So yeah, if you've got old projects and they're broken, call us. Like, it would be a fun discussion.
So just out of curiosity, is that support group digital, like online, or?
It's mostly conceptual. It really is a lot of business therapy or engineer therapy. But you mentioned getting a podcast together for some of these things. There's a lot of talk around that for exactly that reason. But yeah, reach out. There's a couple places we all kind of couple haunts we're all located at, right? We're a bunch of people who are kind of into that thing. So definitely want to connect with anybody who's interested.
Yvonne, what about you?
You can reach me on 107.com/Yvonne. ten7.com/IVAN.
Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks a lot, everyone.